Thanks everybody for a very dynamic and energetic poster session. And that hour plus went by like in the blink of an eye. So I'm sure we could have gone on for much, much longer. Apologize if you would like to spend more time, but there's only so much we can do in the limited time we have. So, but we do want to take this opportunity to kind of get some initial reactions from our external guests. Many of them are investors or involved in technology development in the industry, both emerging and established. So the purpose of this session is to get initial feedback and then maybe even some specific feedback based on the sessions, the posters that different folks got to see. Reactions and comments, critiques, and so forth. And we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A as well. So please, if you use this conference IO to post your questions in, we'll also have a mic. We got a fixed mic here, and we got a roving mic. So the way we're going to use the time, we've got about between 45 minutes. We might be able to push a little bit more than that for everything I just described. So there's no way we're going to get it all in. And be super smooth. So what I'd like to do, though, is give, first of all, an opportunity. We'll use the roving mic for our guests who participated in the Q&A with the PIs and saw the posters to give us their kind of first initial impression. What was your takeaways, any advice or recommendations for us as we go forward? It could be specific on the technical aspects of things, but it could also be about the way we're doing things and general, just general observations. So I know Peter has been involved all along from the very beginning helping us plan this. So let's start off with Peter, and then he can then hand it off to another person, and we'll kind of just go around until we've exhausted all of our visitors, and then we'll go into the Q&A part after that. How's that sound, Peter? Okay. So, and I will try to manage time. So if you guys go on too long, I'll say, can you wrap it up and pass it off to the next person? Sound good? Okay. Oh, I also had to make a comment. If I forget, is that when you're going on the tours this afternoon, those who are taking the tours, you need to take your personal items with you when you go. So and I'll remind again at the end, hopefully I won't forget, Shannon won't let me forget. But just to keep that in mind, you don't want to be leaving anything behind because we're going to wrap up at the end of this session. Thanks. So Peter, it's all yours.
Okay, so can you hear me? Okay,
Well, we got to get somebody to turn the mic up. No, it's supposed to be foolproof. Oh my gosh, it's too high tech for us. All right, I hear it. We're good to go now. Okay.
All right, so the mystery of this mic is revealed. What's
And
inside this thing.
let me ask each of you to stand up so that everybody can see and face the audience and the camera, because I'm sure we're streaming. So.
Okay, great. I don't want to be too repetitive from the material that we covered yesterday, but I would say that from the poster session, I tried to make a point of spending time with a few of the posters that I hadn't seen already that either we weren't doing the presentation work for yesterday, or et cetera, and it just is a reiteration of that session is fantastic. You always want more time when you have time with the posters and with the PIs, and that the CAS showcase in my mind is. It's so multi-purpose. It really is best served as a general way to communicate the type of work that's going on inside NASA, and to connect with the experts in the space for follow-on conversations. So going around this afternoon, a couple of things occurred to me. One is I want to have follow-up conversations with everyone with whom I spoke, and the other is that a big part of what comes out of this are the follow-on conversations and the potential for connecting the research and the PIs that are doing that work here with what we see out in the startup world or out in other parts of the commercial area. And it does tie into this question of where do we take this research from here, either within NASA or on the outside? And a part of solving for that is having really good radar and feelers out into what's going on in the startup community, what's going on in academia, and other areas of innovation, so that we can make those connections as easily and fluidly as possible, without a lot of overhead, without a lot of formality even, but just that idea sparking from a conversation, and the fact that maybe a few months ago I met someone else who was approaching a similar problem from a different direction, and shouldn't these people get together and speak with each other? And so that, the last 2 days, that has just been such a reiterating theme, a repeating theme in what I've seen, and helps us figure out the path forward for this, and helps us figure out within NASA, how do we prioritize and how do we think about the things that we carry forward and the different ways that we can do that. So I'll leave it there.
And if you just pick somebody and pass it on.
Okay. Anybody want to speak next? Don't be shy. Okay, here we go. Srini.
Yeah. Hi, Srini Anand at Intel Capital. I didn't have as much time as Peter. I'm sorry. I just came in maybe 20, 25 minutes back. But I was here last year, and I saw the poster sessions. I think maybe one of them is here again. But what I do like is sharing the progress that you've made, sharing some of the partnerships that you've done. I think it's very important what Peter said is, how do you make the leap to commercial? And if you are interested in commercial, how do you make the leap? And what sort of near and midterm problems that you can solve with this technology? And maybe you find some existing verticals that can use this in terms of licensing. Now, I know all that it doesn't apply to a lot of the hardware-based, whether it's batteries or motors. These things are hard problems. They take a lot of capital. They probably need some non-dilutive capital. But I like that you're actually showing the partnership where you're actually going out and working with commercial partners, whether it's quantum or whether it's aviation. What I do want to add is, when you share the technology, maybe I'm not as well versed with aviation as a lot of others here are, or whether it's space or quantum, is to maybe up-level it a little higher. I think when I see the 3 or 4 different things, the takeaways from this, it always seems very in-depth technical, but maybe there's a translation layer that you apply and share what if it works, right? It could be the best new encryption scheme, but why does it matter? And the reason I'm saying is, on the way over here, I talked to someone who was doing post-quantum crypto, and the question is, if everyone believes it's going to take 5 to 10 years, then why do we care now? And then there are answers to it that I would wish to see that. That would be my only thing. And then the third thing is, I know there's no element of capital here shared, but what does it take for you? If you say, I need another year or 6 months worth of work and I need 3 people, maybe you can share some of that capital constraints that could take you to the next step. It could be just man hours, but whatever it is, it would help to see what does it take to take this out of NASA and apply it to the commercial industry. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Luka Tomjanovic. Very happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I have been in aerospace pretty much my entire life. Most recently, I was a partner at Airbus Ventures, investing in early stage companies around aerospace and other tangential markets and industries. So feel very strongly and passionately about the technologies that we have seen in the projects here, which I believe are all very important and tackling some of the biggest barriers that aviation is facing, especially as we think about the advanced air mobility, to quote Peter at Radius. And those are around safety, certification, manufacturing rates, and I think all of those are it was an excellent subset of projects that I had the chance to briefly see, even without the benefit of yesterday's sessions. I would maybe offer just a few high-level comments. One, I think, is that it is very important to always keep in mind what the end product or service will look like. It's very easy to get lost in R&D and sort of lose line of sight to what the end user is and how they will be utilizing the product or benefiting from the technology. We talked about, or we've heard from the panel earlier today, that there's one of the enablers of innovation, certainly at NASA, but broadly, is breaking down these silos and barriers. And I think in addition to just doing cross centers and cross projects, there's a need to go cross boundaries and into the private sector. So I'm really encouraged that a lot of the projects are already forming partnerships with industry players, and I think this is a great way to actually collect feedback and not lose sight of the ultimate goal. I think aviation is not really known as a fast to iterate and quick to adopt kind of industry. So I think it's really critically important to keep in mind what the practical implementation of those technologies will look like. And for that, again, the best thing is to just keep talking to the customer or identify customers early on and make sure that you're working towards something that they care about. From an investor perspective, what really matters as well is to be able to communicate maybe a bit more clearly what the ROI is and what the value proposition is in a way that really resonates with people who are not necessarily the experts. So when you do come up with these ROIs, I would encourage drawing the system box wide enough so that you can encapsulate any upstream and downstream consequences, maybe some unintended consequences, and you might have great value proposition in a fairly narrow field that you are evaluating, but there might be, pretty serious side effects, either upstream or downstream. So how you manage those and what the complete total value proposition to the customer is, that's very important. And one last point, once you advance on the TRLs and think about commercializing this, a VC will, there will come a time when you will be asked the question of how much time or how much capital do we need to wait until the business starts producing some revenue back. So I think I know this is very much focused on technology, but I think it's important to keep that in mind as early as possible because it might inform some of the decisions that you're making in your projects. Maybe I'll stop here, okay. And happy to talk offline or individually with any other PIs.
Alex, you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Alex with Creative Ventures. We're a financial investor, so we're not specifically focused on the aerospace industry. I do agree with actually everything that has been said so far. So at the behest of sounding like a broken record, I'll be succinct. I feel like there were 3 points I walked away with, and I certainly would have liked more time with the posters. Would have been great to have more conversations. But maybe just in terms of thoughts or further questions that I would ask or want to see answered from the poster session. The first is from a very high level perspective, what's the impact? So one of the questions we always ask is, if it works, will it matter? So when the technology actually gets to scale and maturity, what does it actually enable, or what is the actual impact? The second would be some notional understanding of the timeline or pathway, either in terms of further research and development needs or commercial progress, or just sort of a sense of what a timeline might look like. And I definitely agree that aerospace is an industry that tends to be fairly slow moving compared to other industries. And that brings me to my third question, which would be, are there other applications outside aerospace that the technology might have value in or be useful in? Oftentimes we'll work with companies that might be focused on a certain industry, whether it's aerospace or automotive, but because of the timeline to bring products to market in those industries, they will typically focus on an application in another industry, which might be faster to move and have sort of easier requirements in terms of bringing a product to market. And that allows the company to prove what they're doing works, has value, people will buy it, and also scale up typically a manufacturing process or something like that. So some sense of alternative pathways, and realize I'm talking to an aerospace crowd, but I think much of the technology, certainly that I saw, has applications across a tremendous number of other industries as well.
Thanks very much. And so I know we have a number of other guests who are from outside of NASA, and so we don't want to just limit it to the, the four who've just spoken so far. So if you can raise your hand, if you have like to offer some feedback or comments, and then if not that, if they've said everything we need to hear, then we can go on to some Q&A and further discussion. So. If you could stand up and also tell us where you're from, so we kind of we have the background perspective.
I'll talk a little bit. I'm from General Atomics, I'm from General Atomics, and we build the Predator airplanes, and so a lot of the technologies that CAS has shown is very intriguing. We all know that, but there's no path forward. And you need to show us what that path forward is. I mean, I can go and have a path forward for your technology, but I'm not going to go invest in it. I'm just not, because I already have a product that flies. I already have a product that works. You have to show me why your product or each one of your programs shows me that the product that they're pushing is better than what I can do. Okay, I don't necessarily have the best product, but it works for me. It makes money for my company, and General Atomics is privately owned, so there's no we're not traded, publicly traded, so my boss decides what he wants to do. He tells me. But he tells me that, hey, if you can find a technology that can go onto my airplane and make it better and cost me less to put out, I'm all for it. So within NASA, there's a lot of venues that you guys can utilize to help improve the TRL levels. And if you show me or show the OEMs what that path forward is, we would be interested in jumping on board to help you with that, right? So as an example, you guys have Icona. We're interested in working with Icona. I guess now you guys don't have Icona anymore. I think you guys gave it away or something like that. But if you use Icona to show some of this technology, we're more than happy to help you with it, because we have expertise on Icona, and we could help you with that. And so one of the things that I see here in this, and I've been involved in a couple of case reviews, is that I don't know how to move things forward for you. If you tell me how to move things forward for you, and I think it is relevant to my product line, I'd be more than happy to think about helping you out. So, with that.
Anyone else? Oh, I know there's some other thoughts out there. Come Okay. How about questions then? Let's offer some questions. Or the other option is to also maybe some specific feedback on the individual projects. So if either one, I mean, I think we can go for, but I think questions first might be better, and then if we exhaust all of those, we can go back into a little more detail. So I don't know if you can put up if there's any questions that have come through the IO. No, nobody's got any questions. You're making it hard for me up here, I'll tell you.
There's no cookies in this box, is it? So I'm John Cannell from NASA Langley, and just have a comment based upon my personal experience working at NASA for quite a few decades that I won't say, but I think, to the comments that were made, it just speaks to the importance to me of teaming with the OEMs and other external collaborators early on in a technology development so they have buy-in into whatever it is. That makes the transition so much more easier than us going off and developing something on our own and presenting it to industry and say, look at what we have, isn't this great? And it's, as the last gentleman just mentioned, you then have to prove to them it's gonna work for them and help them both from a technical and a financial standpoint. Whereas if you have the partners involved early on, that transition is just much easier.
So to follow up, please pass that around, and if anybody else has a question, go for it. But I have a follow-up question to that, and it kind of ties back into some of the discussions we had earlier, is that, so when we're presenting information about the projects and activities that we're doing, we tend to be technical, right? Because that's kind of our domain, in the technology development. But it sounds to me like there's opportunities if we could communicate in, say, a poster or in a pitch as to the partnership we have and the value that the partner sees in participating with us, or maybe even the level of investment that they have. Does that mean anything to you guys when you're looking at the potential opportunities around an activity or concept that we're pursuing? If there's a skin in the game, for example, from an external partner, that might indicate that there's traction around the ideas. Go ahead, Jessica.
So with respect to needing to communicate the potential use, our initial thought with a forum like this was to start that process. I'd like to open up the field to get more specific feedback, in addition to changing the words that are being shared to be more targeted to particular applications, to potentially show more of a qualitative ROI that could be used. But if there are key features that would make experiences like this more value added to communicate those future uses of the technology that's being developed, on behalf of the CAS project team, either now or later, if you wish to do it in writing, we definitely want to hear that feedback.
So in response to your question and to the second question there, is that, I'm more likely to, if I'm interested in a project, I'm more likely to go convince my president and my VP that, hey, it behooves us to go and work with you closely. But I have to have a path, right? I mean, I really have to understand what you're doing and how that ties into what my product line is. Whether I work for General Atomics or Lockheed Martin or Boeing, right? I have to have a path to say this product or your technical ideas is going to help my product line improve its capability. So if I am going to infuse somebody to work with you on that, I need to have a return. an ROI that I can track, that I can go back to my boss and say, yeah, I can track that. And there's an end product to it. The bottom of the bucket is usually around 3 to 4 years, right? So if you can come up with something like that for the CAS, I mean, there are several projects here that I looked at, and that's very interesting to us. But it's so low in TRL level, it's great, but how do I take it to the next level? How do I do that? What's the path forward?
So to follow up then is, so if one of the PIs had a conversation with you and said, hey, you expressed interest, and they call you up, is there a dialogue that
Oh, yeah.
goes
Yes.
on to help
Yes.
focus in on what that opportunity is, right?
Yes,
Because
yes. We'd be
you
planning
know,
that.
or would you expect them to do all that research kind of about specifically what you guys are doing, what your product line features are, and all that kind of stuff before they even come to you?
Well, they should research what we do, right? It would be, I mean, I don't know enough of their research. I don't know enough of within the 15 minutes, I don't know everything about it, right? So they need to do enough research to say, hey, here's this product. I think this product can help you communicate more or have a longer endurance or have higher capability in terms of maneuverability, takeoff, and all that sort of thing. That's something that we would be very interested in. So,
Awesome, thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I'm going to throw it.
Follow up on what the gentleman was saying, and kind of what I'm seeing right now is we're bringing a bunch of ideas, and in some cases we're taking shots in the dark at what an airplane needs or doesn't need, or what an assembly line for an airplane may need or won't need. So maybe there should be a two-way street forum where VCs or industry partners that are traditional can say, hey, we're building this thing. Man, we'd love to access these greater power regimes to enable something. I don't have to tell us what we're enabling, but give us targets to shoot at, so that way when we're developing ideas, we're not developing ideas like frogs in a well.
I think that's a good opportunity to talk about what we've been trying to do within Showcase, and it's an experiment, right? We're trying to develop this further, and so having those kinds of conversations, 15 minutes is obviously not enough to get deep knowledge of really what's going on. But it is enough to say, that interests me, right? And then I should have a conversation or maybe have questions to ask along the lines of what Samuel just said, or what was brought up earlier is what's the value? We think you're the value I have for you is this, and then that's where it starts off the conversation. So that's the purpose, the intention here is that we're not going to get closed deals at the end of a day and a half, right? I mean, what we're going to do is we're going to spark some opportunities of connections, and hopefully those will then develop. So, part of that though is following up and establishing those connections, and then I think getting back to what Jessica's point is how do we know that those are happening, and so we can do what we can to facilitate and strengthen those, as well as identify where they're not happening and maybe force them to happen. So that's just a comment from the project kind of perspective. So Gary, go ahead.
Thanks. I just want to say my frogs in a well idea will come back. I don't know. I'm sorry. Obviously not picked by CAS. So my question to the VCs is, how can we get better in touch with the ecosystem you guys live in day to day, where you're getting exposed to needs that we could target, right? Do we just read TechCrunch every day or sign on to a newsletter? Or, there's a community you guys live in. A lot of that community is exposed online or in groups, I don't know, at events. How can we, from the government, start navigating near the edges of those ponds so we see what's going on, so we can be better informed about the kind of topics we pick up and how we shape the things we're developing?
I think that's an excellent point. Do you guys want to comment on Gary's question? Alex or Peter or Luca?
I'd probably say, I mean, you said how VCs are exposed to it. In fact, we are exposed to it, at least from my own perspective. We are exposed to it from talking to entrepreneurs. I don't pretend to understand that there are gaps in all the industries that I look at. If I talk to 3 or 4 companies, I realize it's an impending problem. You can keep track of some trends, but you don't pretend to be seeing the future. But to your second point, how do you get plugged in? So I was just checking, I think I see the second question there, private tech incubators, and there is this thing called Starburst out in LA. They're doing this for aerospace. I mean, they're doing this for space tech. And Techstars, which is a very well-known incubator more in the broad software and other areas, have joined up with Starburst. So there is some interest because space tech has become an area. So where is that aviation tech? I think eVTOL has taken a lot of the publicity and a lot of the attention, and drones have taken that. But there are other things around that. Maybe that's the kind of partnership that you want. I don't know what the monetary exchange there is, but they can bring all of those elements. They can bring the coaching. What they do well is all of that. Right? But what they don't do well is also sensing and telling you that these are the gaps. It's kind of, that comes pretty much from the industry. And usually VCs have these CIO councils or CTO councils where you go once in a while, once in 6 months, and you talk to them and they tell us like what is working and what's not working. What is your advisory council? Is there an advisory council that includes Boeing, Airbus, General Dynamics, and a bunch of others, telling them that this is the problem? We are doing certification and we don't have a software that does it well. So you get to that. But most of the time, entrepreneurs tell us that.
Thanks. So, Peter, go ahead.
So I would reiterate, that. It's at the bottom line, it's about, just having conversations with us every few months, stay in touch. Internally at Radius, we keep a database of everything we see going on in the space, and try to track and capture all of that startup activity, all of that partnership activity, predicted timelines on major milestones for the different companies. Because one piece of our job is to try to synthesize a picture of the state of this whole movement in technology's impact on flight, and try to develop a viewpoint that sums up from all of that insight, all of that activity in different startups or different parts of the rest of the community, to have a feel for that. So, that comes from conversations with entrepreneurs. It comes from coming to events like this one, and then also things that others in the community, like the Vertical Flight Society, pull together. There are just a lot of opportunities to get at least cursory level exposure to who's doing what and what's going on and where the problems are occurring. I would say we also spend a fair amount of time close with the standards bodies who are trying to sort out the systems level engineering of how this future system is going to fit together. And from that, you can also start to see where the gaps and the needs are. But it is the sum total of those conversations that sort of gives you the picture and helps develop that profile.
And just to add to this, if you really want to seek out what the problems are, you should be talking to the customers. And yes, the VCs are there to help and guide you and support you and do whatever is possible to get you there, ultimately to your goal. But you should be getting inspiration from the market and from the customers. And coming up with an idea for a project for the sake of being busy or doing something maybe slightly better is not really going to get you anywhere. It has to be driven by a critical need in the market. And the best place to start is the customer.
Great. Any other questions? Oh, so here's going.
All right, so as a technical person, I'm getting a little bit of mixed messages. So we're told 30% we should be failing 7 out of 10 times. And that's how we're going to innovate, right? So for you guys in the real world, government worker, right? If I go to an industry partner, you don't want to hear I'm going to fail 7 out of 10 times. You got to make money. You need me to succeed. So we get a little bit of a mixed message. We want to do cutting edge research, and we want to take risks, but at the same time, we have to be successful to get into industry. So we're dancing a line here. And I think that's why everybody in this, everybody complains about transition, and it's because that. Researchers like me, I don't want to do engineering tasks. If the problem is simple, industry has engineers, they should do it. As the government, I feel like we should be taking the risk. I agree, we should be failing 7 out of 10 times. But our industry partners need to realize that we're going to take high risk for high reward. So we're going to need you guys to say, all right, well, we dumped a little bit of money, you failed 7 out of 10 times, but we got 3 really good things in those 7 in that last round of 10 projects. I will ask you guys, are you okay with a percentage like that, or is that too risky for industry, for the VC world? Does CAS need to change their expectations on risk? How does that translate between what we do from the government into industry?
That's a big question.
I'll jump in, and I think that's an important point. So folks have different risk tolerance, right? And we're an early stage venture investor. We take a lot of risk. The venture capital is called risk capital for a reason. And the 70% probability of failure, I think for us that's perfectly nominal and built into our model of how we invest, provided that the consequence of success is actually meaningful or impactful. So it's sort of a question of risk reward. Now I think we probably have a very different risk tolerance than industry, for example, but companies we tend to work with, maybe we invest in pretty early on, help the company de-risk both along technical and business metrics and get to the point where it might be more palatable to industry or maybe to other types of investors. There's sort of a whole landscape of risk tolerance that people might have and take. And I think part of the question really is identifying folks to work with who have the appropriate risk tolerance for the stage of the project or the company, if it's even a company at that point.
So to follow up on the notion of the failure, so there's different types of risk at different parts of the process, as well as different risk takers, right? So I mean, your risk, each researcher is taking a risk, and the likelihood that they're going to compete for, in the past, the way CAS has worked is we've competed, right? You come to a pitch day and you're maybe 1 out of 7 or something that they may be selected, and you would be, to get there you were 1 out of something, right? And so there's risk, there's failure all along that path, and it's kind of we're fooling ourselves if we aren't recognizing that there's risk. We're navigating a series of risks, right, as we move along. And so what the risk at the transition level of coming out of CAS is stuff that's already made it through a number of assessments, right? And at the risk that some of it's technical risk, some of it's programmatic risk, some of it's business risk, there's a whole variety of them. So it's not like there's one risk we're all taking. I think it's important to recognize it's a sequence and process of risk management. And so when we are looking at CAS as a portfolio of projects, there is a balance in the portfolio similar to investment portfolios. You don't want, you want to take sufficient technical risk that you're going to have some percentage of success of the really big wins, which is what we're trying to drive towards when we say high transformational potential. We're going to take high risk for high potential impact. That's what we're talking about. So that's similar to, I think, what we've heard from the VCs. So all along there's a different way to think about risk anyway. And I'm not to pretend that we understand it all or that we have a whole theory of how this works. But we definitely don't have so going back to the second question here is about this notion of, well, where do we get these tech incubators? Like I think Starburst is a broker kind of organization. They provide some kind of services. Techstars is an incubator kind of facilitates a number of innovation. Angel networks also provide support for more of the stuff that's already ready to go into commercialization. So I would just wanted to comment that NASA has some of these. It doesn't have all of these. And as some of them work well for doing the types of things we've done in the past, and some of them don't work so well for doing the things we're trying to do here. And so part of that is understanding where we need to make improvements, make changes, and recognize how to utilize the services and skills and capabilities we have within the agency already. So when we have licensing, we have commercialization, we have public affairs, we have financial management, we have all those, but they're not necessarily set up to be an incubator, right? And so, so figuring that out, getting feedback from you guys as to what we need, and also suggestions of how it's done elsewhere, and we can take as a model and examples of things to try and experiment with within our own environment is really helpful, and that's another part of this conversation we're having today. So you got a question back
Yeah,
there?
this is a question generally for maybe CAS management and even the VCs as well. Assuming sort of an optimistic view, let's say we do produce something that transitions or is potential transition or companies interested in, how do you see sort of the future after, let's say you are transitioning? Does NASA play sort of a consultant role? Like, do the researchers that developed it work with the company closely? Like, I guess I'm just sort of new into this, so I'm trying to understand in the future, are we going to work with the company, go to the company and work with them, work within NASA? How does the relationship unfold after you, find something that you want to transition?
There are examples of that historically that we have been able to
Wait,
build
John, can you wait for the microphone? Yeah.
agreements and relationships around that sort of additional support. Now, we obviously need to be careful with that as you're applying civil service resources to support what could be viewed as a single company objective. But with the right agreements, we've been able to do that at times. So it's not necessarily a throw it over the fence, hands off, and they run with it. So again, there are opportunities to be creative with that, but it'll be a one-off condition. Yeah, and we'll figure that out. So Marty, I'm looking at the time here.
Yeah, we
We're
have
just
about 5
a
more
little bit
minutes.
left. I just want to make a comment, reflect a little bit on what I think I've heard over the last 45, 50 minutes we've been talking here. Making sure that we've got relevance around the activities that we choose to invest in, such that answering the question, if it works, will it matter, is a critical thing that we need to be doing at our upfront stages. But our ability to be smart in terms of identifying those and investing in those comes from a much more regular engagement with this community and additional members of this community, whether it be the emerging market, the traditional market, or convergent markets and the venture side. As Marty had indicated, we've talked earlier over the last day and a half, this event is an effort, has expanded to be an effort to try to do that. What I'm also hearing is that, and this is kind of an obvious statement, doing this once a year is not enough. So I think one of the things that we need to think about as we are evolving CAS is what are those additional venues and mechanisms to continue to get your eyes and ears on what we're doing, to be able to influence what we are investing in, and to be able to enable those transition paths by means of a much more consistent communication with you. The thought of having once a quarter a CAS showcase or a showcase isn't going to happen. Maybe we do it at a large scale like this, remaining once a year. But I think we have reason to think about other methods and mechanisms to bring you folks in, whether it be virtually or otherwise on a smaller basis, so that we're smarter and that you're smarter as well on where we are with our developments and activities, such the opportunity to transition that and impact the community are there. So I mean, just a couple comments from my side. Richard, Isaac, do you have any thoughts or reflections? Marty, I mean, you've got the mic, so I'm not.
No.
I don't need to.
I've said what I was
Set you
gonna
up.
say.
Okay.
So we also have, Jay or Jimmy?
No,
if there's
I'll pass
anything
it on.
you
I
wanna
don't really-
offer, that would be helpful too.
My only comment was going to be about John. There might be avenues that are already set that we can be there and don't have a full showcase, but being able to maybe a conference or other type of event in which we can participate to communicate the things that we're doing in a more regular basis, no more than 6 months apart or so. But there are avenues that we can explore. That was my only comment. You have any?
Okay. Well, we're at the end of the time for this session, so thanks very much for excellent interchange with questions, answers, feedback, and suggestions. This is really helpful for us as we go forward. So